to talk about these today. So we will go through opening remarks, and then we'll briefly introduce the ACP Foundation and Flying Horses Talk for newcomers. I will introduce today's speakers, and Hubert would talk about startup incubation in healthcare, and Lauren will share her experience in healthcare startup venture capital. At the end, we're going to have some time for Q&A. I hope this session will be very interactive, so that feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the chat box or maybe later in person as well. So first, let's get started on the opening remarks. Before we jump into the introduction of ACP, I just want to spend a minute that we can observe a silence for the Asian community, for the recent, victims from the shooting incidents that happened in Atlanta, and also raising violences against Chinese and Asian communities. So let's just be silent for a minute. Okay, thanks everyone. So I hope with the Asian community coming together and Chinese community coming together, that more and more so will play a bigger role in this community and society in the U.S. And we can see the light at the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel. And hopefully ACP Foundation and Flying Horses Talk is such an event that can give you a chance to get to know each other and talk to each other. So given that, I want to hand it over to the president of ACP Foundation to introduce ACP Foundation and Flying Horses Talk to us.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So my name is Qiang from ACP Foundation. Yes, this is today we're talking about health. Actually, the gun violence is make it easy to take off the people's life. Just one bullet. So even we invest a lot of money on our health system, build up our medical system, but it still can be destroyed easily by single bullet. So today I don't want to talk too much about this, but just remember here is also the home of all Asian American, and also here is where the other together is a family. So ACP Foundation, it's an associate for Chinese professional. We founded in 1993. Actually, it's very interesting. Is our first a few founders from the UT Southwestern Medical Center. Today, one of our speaker, Lauren, she also graduated from the UT Southwestern Medical Center. So this is a kind of like we have the same original source. So since then, ACP Foundation planning in the Chinese community, and actually it's local community, and provide a lot of the professional services. And we build up the very good. We gain reputation from the local communities, and also especially last year in 2020 in COVID-19, the whole Chinese community contribute $330,000. We purchased the personal protective equipment and delivered to the hospitals, delivered to the police department, delivered to the firefighter stations. So it's a more than million equipment like masks and gloves we deliver to the hospitals. So the Flying Horse tonight is a sixth special edition. Flying Horse Talk, basically it's a small group. We're talking about innovation, talking about entrepreneurship. So many people here, it's kind of like a club or kind of like a salon. So we sat together before since 2018, the first flying talk section. Yeah, we talking together. But last year, we turned to the online Zoom meeting, but still attracted more and more people join us. And today there's I see also there's some new friends join us. Thanks joining us. And special edition basically it's a focus on just a single topic. And also today we're talking about health investment. So this is I will give the more time to the Jay, and he will introduce the speakers tonight. Flying Horse actually getting more and more popular, and become the one of important brand of ACP Foundation. We have the annual MetroCon every year before the Thanksgiving, and the Flying Horse basically is a monthly event, and we also have the special edition. It's not certain time, but it's focus on the special speakers or focus on the special topic. And tonight also we have the Maggie Mar. She is our founder of the Flying Talk, and we will give her time to the recap. And now the time back to the Jay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John. So just a few points I missed to show this page here is that we have this MetroCon every year that's been organized by ACP Foundation. That really a good opportunity for all the Asian community and Chinese community come together every year. That this is one day event that used to attract anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people every year coming here all together talk about innovation, technology, healthcare, and many topics. So moving forward, and Flying Horses, so I personally attended the first few events in 2018, and I've seen a huge growth in this talk and being very popular over the past 4 years. So having said that, I would like to introduce today's speakers, and then we can jump into the more interesting topic about healthcare, innovation, and incubation. So two special guest speakers here today for Flying Horses Talk. First, the Hubert Zazisek. He is the CEO and co-founder of Health Wildcatters. I'll give more details about him in a minute. And the Lauren Tyra, she is the scientist at Green Parks and Golf Ventures. And myself as the moderator of, I'm working at Perspective Diagnostics on business development. So first of all, Dr. Hubert Zazisek, actually three of all, and one thing that's in common between three of all and ACP Foundation is what Chang just mentioned about UT Southwestern. We all came from UT Southwestern. Hubert was a faculty member a few years ago there. Lauren and I did our PhD in biological sciences a few years ago there too. So we have a lot common with ACP Foundation, and I'm glad that we all together here talk about healthcare innovation today. First, Hubert is the CEO and co-founder of Health Wildcatters. That's a nationally top-ranked healthcare accelerator and investment fund in Dallas. He also holds a few leadership positions in venture capital firms or angel groups here in Dallas, as well as founding a health hacking crisis network recently as we have this pandemic. So I will hand it to Hubert to just talk a few words before we jump into the topic. Hubert, you're on mute.
Well, thanks, Jay. You want me to go ahead and share my screen and start, or do you want to?
No, just speak a few words and then I will introduce Lauren and then we can jump into the topic.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and also, just like Lauren, I'm sure we have had so many Chinese and Asian friends that we, spend a lot of time on the bench together. I was a postdoc first, and have gained so many friends in the Chinese and Asian community over the years. And really, I'm originally from Austria. I did not know as many Asians, but in science and research in the US, I got to know so many friends. So to me, it is just absolutely unthinkable that we have to discuss the topic of racism in the context of Asians. So anyway, we're with you, and I'm sure you know that. Other than that, on my person, I'll weave it into the conversation so it doesn't get too dry. So that's enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Hubert. Yeah. I also, the first time I know about Hubert is at UT Southwestern. I was taking a course that's called Innovating Healthcare Solutions, and he was the mentor and the speaker there. And that was the first time I got to know him. And the Health White Hatters is where I spent a lot of time after that, going there and being a volunteer. So I've seen how healthcare started and how it's been very successful recently. So I'm excited to hear about what Hubert is going to talk about Health White Hatters and incubation. And the second speaker today is Lauren Tyra, a friend of me, and she graduated from UT Southwestern for PhD, and now is an investment scientist at Green Park and Golf Ventures, who invest a lot in healthcare innovation and startup space. So I'm very excited about to hear her thoughts around venture capitalism as a person with STEM background, education, as a PhD, and being very active in that space. Lauren.
Hi, thank you, Jay, and hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk to your group today. When Jay and I first started talking about putting this talk together, the goal was really to build bridges, right? Build bridges between the healthcare venture capital community and the healthcare accelerator community and this entrepreneurship community, that you guys are a part of in the Chinese community, and seeing the devastation that's happened, not only the rise in hate crimes, which is abominable, but the devastation in the last week. It makes these efforts even that much more important, that we come together and that we work together and that we work to build tolerance within our communities. And I'm glad to be a part of that. And I just want to say thank you to ACP for having Hubert and I talk today. And thank you to Jay for organizing this.
Absolutely. I want to do some add-on for the Lauren. So Lauren will be the candidate of the this year ISD place one board member. What's a vote day? It's in the May or
May 1st.
May 1st. Okay. So just about 1 month away. So Lauren has very strong science background, and also she loves children. And I hope there other audience here just know the Lauren more after tonight's speech. So I hope when you go vote, and also please give the voter Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So, and then it's about myself. So I'm not officially attached to ACP, but I've been very active participating in events at ACP since 3-4 years ago. Started with the Flying Horses Talk and then ACP Foundation, the MetroCon. Right now, I'm a VP of Business Development at Perspectum, a diagnostic medtech company, started in the UK, now in Dallas office. I was also a management consultant at BCG, where I did some market strategy works there and for the last 3 years. But before then, I was a PhD student at UC Southwestern with Lauren. So I'm glad that we will talk about healthcare innovation, startup incubation, and the venture capital. So I will hand to Hubert first to get started, his journey in the startup incubation, the health wildcatters, and some of the stories there. Hubert?
And I will share my screen now. Who can show? Okay. There we go. Okay. Click this away. Good deal. Well, thanks again for having me, and also for the invitation, Jay and Lauren, for including me. So it's a pleasure, and Lauren has my vote. She knows that. She also knows I live in Dallas, so I can't vote for her. But I'm a cheerleader for sure. Lauren is also a volunteer at Health Wildcatters, and so we're grateful for that. And I'm very fond of her, as many of you know. She helps a lot with our selection of the startups that come into the program, and she's a very generous and giving person. But right now, I will direct your attention towards the I in funding. When you look at the I in funding right up here, and you go one row up, this is Health Wildcatters headquarters here. You can see my cursor here right above the I. The 20th floor of this building is where our headquarters are in downtown Dallas. I did not take this picture myself, but it is a fun place to be in downtown. And if you're ever in downtown, or we're going to start having our events again, then you're welcome to visit us. It's got beautiful views from there because we're right on the edge of downtown. But I'm here really going to be talking a lot more about what a healthcare accelerator is, and I think most likely what we will do is I'll explain how the things work that we do, and then I have ample opportunity to give examples. But then Lauren will give her talk, and then we will also give an example of a company that is associated with both of our firms, a company that went through our accelerator and got started, and then has a tie-in with GPG, and tell the whole story of the continuum as well. And so that's going to be a way for maybe us to do it in conversation. But first things first, I'm going to go over here. I just realized that my bio is updated and this slide isn't. So, or partially. As you can see, we have now accelerated 77 companies, and ignore the 68 on here because it's supposed to be 77 in both. And this number here is now 200 million. So lucky for us, these things do change quite quickly. But what this means is over the course of the last 7+ years, Health Wildcatters has invested in 77 healthcare startups. And those startups have gone on to raise right in the neighborhood of $200 million. What you also should know is that Health Wildcatters itself makes a very modest investment of $30,000 up to $100,000. So we're not going to be the ones that write $200 million worth of checks. We're really at the beginning, at the seed stage. We also have an extensive mentor network that consists of most of our investors that are mentoring in the program, and that's over 100, and also mentors who are professionals that mentor and give their time. People like Lauren and many others that just simply know stuff and are willing to share that with young, and young, I mean young at heart. Age-wise, we have anywhere from post-college all the way up to eligible for Medicare. So I love that too, because innovation doesn't stop at any given time. Young at heart mentors of all stripes. The next factor here that I want to point out, I'm just kind of setting the goalposts on all this, is that we have companies from over 25 states and in 3 countries now. And what's interesting about this is because very often people will know us in the context of the work that we do here in Dallas or in the North Texas region. And the obvious assumption is that we are here to assist local startups. And then the very obvious next question is, how do you even find 77 of them? Now, these days you could find 77 of them, but needless to say, that wouldn't be a very good selection process if we invested in every single healthcare startup out of Dallas. I'll get into our structure in a second, but what this serves to illustrate is simply the fact that we draw from all over the country and also from the world now. And in order to achieve that, we have to have something here that is of value to these companies, because frankly speaking, the money that we invest is not enough to entice somebody to move. So there's got to be a little bit more than that. And I think that is starting to prove itself true. When you look at the key elements that we add, we take a pre-seed stage startup that is in the healthcare space very loosely and make a small investment. But then these 4 puzzle pieces all come into the equation. We spend 3 months with them. They have workspace at our facility. They can also rent workspace following those 3 months. We spend 3 months on the education side, trying to really normalize them, trying to help them find the right fit so they are acceptable potential investments for angel investors in the future. And wrapping a lot of mentorship around them, hundreds and hundreds of hours of mentoring of people like Lauren, but also successful healthcare entrepreneurs and successful business people, and you name it, physicians, any kind of person you can think of with many, many different backgrounds that have some experience that they're willing to share. And then lastly, business resources that we wrap around these startups. The goal is to take a startup that is not quite angel or venture capital investable. So a startup that is, and I'm an angel investor myself, that just when you look at 10 criteria, you would have to admit that number 8, 9, and 10 don't have a check mark. So as an angel investor, that's a very simple decision. At that point, you say, sorry, I can't invest. Every startup that goes through my due diligence process has to have 10 check marks. And the reason is that 8, 9, and 10 are risk factors for me that I am not in a position to de-risk. I can't take this unpredictable risk. In the accelerator, this goes to our founding. In the accelerator, we have basically that same checklist. But when we get to 8, 9, and 10 of concerns or things that aren't quite ready for the limelight, we look at those number 8, 9, and 10 and say, are those things that can be fixed? Because when we go back to the formation of Health Walkers, which involves Lauren's partners, Carl Silverstrom and Clay Heighton, and myself and another person, the initial question was, as angel investors, how can we help startups that aren't quite ready for us? And when you're in a position like mine, I've been in healthcare innovation for 15 years now, you get approached by people all the time about, hey, help me. And of course I do, and I know Lauren does too, as much as we can, but there comes a point at which you say, so who is paying my job, my paychecks, and am I doing everything in my that I'm supposed to do? And how do I justify helping startups that aren't even part of my portfolio? And the answer is, you really can't as an angel investor. You don't have enough time to tutor every single one of them to the point at which they then become investable to you. But if you were to spin up an accelerator, and this is what my partners had intended to do, they were starting to look at how can we help these startups. We know that our model of angel investment isn't going to be the solution. They discovered accelerators and said, well, if we start this, and this was done in partnership with another accelerator, and bring somebody on board, and that was me, to launch this thing, then we can have the education, we can invest in these startups that aren't fully ready yet, make sure that they've got check marks next to everything that they need to be investable, spend 3 months with them, and then make them investable. And at the time, we will put a little bit of money to work, give them enough money that they can live and engage a few professionals, and then and then be presentable on something called a pitch day. So this is kind of everything in a nutshell, but I think it sets the stage for the things that I will now go through here as well. So the mentor network is an extremely important part. And so now we can play Where's Waldo, and I hope Lauren is not behind the white bars here. Lauren, do you happen to know where you are? Okay. Well, if Lauren was a picture here in this puzzle, it would be at least 4 times as big as these others, okay? Because she's very generous with her time and very important to our operation. But what we did here is we just took a collective snapshot of all the, I really could swear you're in there. It's gonna drive me crazy now. I need to move on to the next slides more. These are the people, these are the faces of the people, and that's not all of them, that spend their time and effort here. Many different motivations. I already talked about, a lot of them are investors. We generally don't out them, meaning many of them want to, are happy to be investors, are happy to be part of this, but don't necessarily want to wear a badge around their neck because at social gatherings, they might just be gaining too many friends in a hurry. But they're willing to not just invest their money, but also their time. And then there are people that are just simply giving of their time for whatever reason. They are not in a position to invest, or it's not the right time in their life to become an angel investor, and that's fine. We're grateful for their contributions. What unites them, though, is they want to have an impact in healthcare. They have either a background, a passion, or a family reason, or sometimes also we have several people who are not healthcare people who would like to learn more about healthcare, would like to do healthcare angel investment in a group, not by themselves, because they don't have the skill set. And then also, they're often the most important people in the room because they can ask the question, raising their hand saying, I don't have an MD, but this doesn't make sense to me. And so it's easy for them to say that when a physician couldn't speak up because they're supposed to know. And what it turns out then is that it really wasn't explained well. And when you look at who these startups are pitching to in the future, many of these people will not be healthcare professionals. So it is absolutely prudent, but it is not just prudent, it is imperative that they know how to speak to a willing investor who does not have a healthcare background. Generally, we draw a line somewhere with a college education. So what I say is kind of speak at the level at which a college graduate would understand you. Sometimes I get challenged at that, but you have to understand that the difficulty here lies in explaining everything in layman's terms, but at the same time, you can't stop in let's say a 5-minute presentation, you can't stop and start explaining every single organ system. That just leads too far, right? So there's the assumption of the education level is a general college education or advanced high school education even, to have this kind of conversation. And by the way, we do have investors and mentors in Health Law Academies who don't have a college education, and I value them greatly. So this is not meant to be a requirement, but it's meant to just explain the norm. Kind of the typical angel investor will have that level of education. They fall into 3 categories, like I already said: the mentor investor, the mentors who are professionals in an area, so they're giving off their time and are willing to spend time with these startups pro bono. And also our professional investors, which are venture capitalists who are willing to spend time with them as well. It's understood that they generally will be a little bit more picky. They might not take all the meetings with the whole 10 startups every year, but rather with the 2 or 3 that they might have an interest in investing in. This is the slide that really illustrates our community involvement. We justify the things that we're known for in North Texas. I'll have a couple of slides on that for a minute, but the things we're known for are the things we do in the community. And given our business model that angel investors, every year we collect $1 million and that gets used up in a year and invested in 8 to 12 startups, it's a little bit of a hard sell to say to these investors, and by the way, your money is also going to pay for hackathons and educational events, and Hubert just going to conferences to speak and all that stuff. Well, they would be okay with some of it, probably at the level at which we're doing it. Some would say, hey, buddy, that's cool and everything, but how much of that money is being spent on that? So they're very generous, but this slide illustrates why we have the liberty to do a lot of this, a lot more than would be prudent for just an investment firm, because these firms support what we do in the community. They want us to do this type of work. They want to be known to support healthcare entrepreneurs. They're good stewards, good citizens. Yes, some of them can draw business from us as well, but I can promise you that none of them calculates it that way. They know that they might draw a client, but they also know that they could spend that money on something else. They know that by doing what they do and supporting us, they're supporting the greater health innovation community in the region and beyond. So the examples of such events, this is our annual highlights of the last year. We'll get to touch upon the Lantern story in a minute, so I won't talk about that, but we had an IPO. We ran, this is one slide here with one hackathon in the middle, and all of you should know that those are free or almost free to participate in. You have wonderful opportunities to put your heads together with other people who are experienced of different backgrounds, to come up over the course of a weekend with a potential business model. And some of our winners from these competitions have started businesses, and winners from other hackathons have gone on to have big exits as well. So hackathons are fun, but they're also often touching upon very serious potential problems that can result in the creation of an absolutely viable company. Actually, one of our companies this year, it's looking like it's forming into a real company. And you have to understand, within the course of 36 hours, these people met, defined a problem, and started working on a solution. And now they're in that next process. So they're still very early for us to invest in, but it's certainly fun to see. Another event we have every year, again, open to all of you as well, is our pitch day, where after the program is finished, and I'll have a slide on the program here in a second. After the program is finished every year, all the startups will present their pitches. If you don't want to wait till November, you can go to our YouTube channel, and you'll see a lot of these pitches there also. So here are a couple more examples of things we have done over the last year. We had a Wish Hackathon, which was only women only hackathon, which was tremendous fun. This was about a year ago, so this was the last in-person event at Health Wildcatters. Then we started the Health Hacking Crisis Network, or really I started it as a way to bring people together around the shared concerns with COVID in spring of last year. And then we also had our first MidVentures conference and had to immediately turn it into a virtual conference last year, which is a health innovation focused investment conference for startups with a pitch competition. We've done the pitch competition for many, many years. So you can see that these events and these type of activities are outside the scope of just looking for startups. And while any of those type of activities could bring startups to us, it is a very circuitous way. And you could argue that running an ad or doing something else could be more efficient. So while we do think and do know that some startups find us this way, overall, what's important is to build the community and to help young and young at heart entrepreneurs and wannabe entrepreneurs to get over those first hurdles and help them launch something. Whether they end up in our accelerator or not is another question. That's not the agenda for us. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the mechanics of our process and how we do things, and what happens during the accelerator. I think I'm still good on time. Yeah, it's still 20 minutes. So I don't have a slide for the funding piece, but I want to say this here because I mentioned it a second ago, and that is Number one, I've raised 8 $1 million funds, give or take 100,000, but 8 right around $1 million. So those were mostly raised from North Texas people, but also from people elsewhere, mostly North Texas, mostly small checks, 5 digits, almost all of them. Some are 6, but most of them 5, which means if you do the math, over 100 investors over the course of now 7+ years that have made one investment at least in one of our 8 funds. And why is this important is because that represents 127 individuals who are actual accredited healthcare investors. You will be hard pressed to find a group like that anywhere in the country, because most angel groups aren't just healthcare only, and most angel groups actually don't necessarily consist of people who have written checks, except for the check to join the club. In our case, there's no fee to join the club. You join the club by making an investment. And so these are all, I want to make sure this everyone understands, these are accredited investors. This is a legal term. There are things that they have to prove or evidence that they are indeed eligible to make these type of risky investments. But they do that, and they are, like I said, not just motivated by the fact that they have an opportunity to meet healthcare startups and invest in them, but also that they can play an active role in these startups by helping them. And then on the justification side, you have to understand too, as an angel investor, it's a pretty lonely thing. I mean, where do you start? My first 2-3 investments were terrible, basically. There's no other way to put it. My wife is one room over this way, so I'm not going to elaborate, but it's not the ones I brag about. That's for sure, because I didn't know any better. So here, the situation is that somebody would write a check, get into the Health Wildcatters fund with a relatively small check. Then, if you think about it, being immediately in 10 startups, it's almost like a mutual fund. Again, it's not a mutual fund, but it's like a 10 little micro investments. And when you go by what the Angel Capital Association says about a diversification in angel investments, they say you should be into 15 to 20 investments. Well, that would cost you at a rate of 25,000 minimum each, $500,000 to be in 20. At Health Wildcatters, you can probably be in those for a tenth of that. So you can achieve the level of diversification that you want to achieve with a couple of checks. Instead of my first 3 investments, we were terrible. They're goose eggs, they're zeros. So that's an important thing to know. So there's absolutely a commercial reason for them to join us. That is not just because they love mankind. So this is a very valid and reasonable way to go about it. And if you like it more, go for it and invest in individual startups as you gain the experience, as you know more people, as you know good deals. So just for the math, to finish the math here, when Health Wildcatters makes an investment, you can think of it as we put a $1 million valuation on each of these startups, and we own just under 10% of these startups. Okay, that's how the portfolio shakes out after the course of 1 year. We've made these 8 to 10 investments. So roughly, if you thought about it that way, that would be the way to approach it. And why is this interesting is because the investor will say, oh, wow, I got into, let's say, 10 startups, if it's $50,000 minimum, with $5,000 each at a $1 million valuation. And as an investor, I can tell you that never happens. I never get approached by anyone that gives me a valuation at $1 million. It just doesn't happen. It's going to be 3, 4 minimum, almost always. So they're getting a very unique investment opportunity as well. So I just wanted to, my family has decided to just text like crazy, so I need to put this on night mode. It's like flashing from the side the whole time. So now you understand a little bit about the background and how we function. And so now let's go a little bit into, and I know we've got another 10 minutes, a little bit into how the mechanics work. So we start in the May-June time period. Right now, applications are open. And we are international, so we've actually taken an Israeli and a Spanish startup in the last cohort. We've taken other startups from outside the US prior as well. It's a minority, but we're open internationally. So we started with over 500 applications last year, and on several different platforms that we are reachable. And then got those down to about 50, 70 based on a variety of criteria. That's my partners and I, Lauren as well, looking at all of those and putting our heads together on what we like. So some of it is straightforward. We love what they're doing. We love who they are, all that stuff. Some of it has to do with our portfolio. I mean, we might have several startups in this category, and so we're not really interested in taking another one in this category. It's really hard to say that at the beginning, to say this is what we exclude, but pretty much what you should expect is that we exclude almost nothing. So we're willing to look at a lot of different stuff in digital health, medical devices, pharma, tech-enabled services, healthcare consumer goods, diagnostics. So we're very, very wide and open to any kind of innovation. That said, obviously, if we find a startup that is exactly the same as something we already invested in, then it could be a good startup, it just might not be a fit for us. So there's many different things that come into the equation that get us down to the 50 to 70. Those are phone calls and Zoom meetings we take, and in-person meetings. So we take 50 to 70 meetings in the spring time period, May, June, and basically come up with our top 30 list. And that top 30 list is who we invite to pitch live in July. Again, last year that was all on Zoom. Usually it's in person or a hybrid version of that. Our investors and mentors are invited to this event, and they vote and help us come up with a hit list of who do we want to invite, all the way up to best to worst startup. What I can tell you is that those 30 startups will generally we're not inviting them unless we are willing to basically make an investment in them. So none of them are bad. Do we find out a little bit more? Yes, because we get to know them a little bit more. So maybe when it's all said and done and we look back, maybe we discover that out of those 30, I don't know, 2, 3, we learned something else that makes us shy away, something we couldn't find out in the due diligence earlier. So we still get some additional information, but this is not the type of due diligence will hear from Lauren here in a minute. This is pretty light. We're willing to take a crazy amount of risk when you think about it, and the only reason we can take it is because we know we can spend 3 months with them to help fix the things that we believe are making them very risky. So here is an example of as I told you, there are so many different types of startups we take. So here's an example of a pathway for an early stage digital health company. And again, there's almost no way to come up with a stereotypical startup because we're so diverse. But you would imagine that they would figure out their business model and alpha. Basically the alpha prototype at the beginning of the program. Very often they come to us already with a beta. So they're already testing with customers. Frankly, some of them are already selling. But again, I'm giving an example here of a super early stage one. They would shake it out, work with some of our partners to tweak down to a beta pilot, and then sign up with some of our partners potentially. Let's think about it, let's say a hospital system, to sign them up and start working on the beta to tweak it. So they will also be prepared for the business development and investment process in the later stages, whereas on the early side, market, FDA, demand search, or just a business plan model canvas might be deployed. So it's very diverse. Every startup is different, and we work with each of them individually. They also help each other a lot. So this having the cohort together it's an important aspect here. this all culminates in a pitch day where investors, mentors, partners, press shows up, and that is what we regard the finished product. It isn't always finished, but it's the culmination of 3 months worth of work in a 5-minute pitch. This 5-minute pitch is designed to be something they can use in all sorts of settings, but it's a very typical thing. They also learn, of course, the elevator pitch and a variety of other things and tools in their toolbox that they can use. What happens almost in unison is that these startups are well received by any pitch competition, by anyone that interviews them, whether they invest in them or not, because they can tell a coherent story in 5 minutes. And that one unfair advantage out of Health Wildcatters is absolutely that a lot of people know that. I mean, a lot of my contacts, pitch competitions, event coordinators, others know that a Health Wildcatters graduate is going to have a very good pitch. And so, if you need a couple of startups that have a good pitch, send me an email. There you go. So it's very easy for them, and whether they invest or not, what I will say is it creates an absolutely unfair advantage, which is not unfair. We're hoping to help the 10 best we can help. But it is fun to see when others when they pitch somewhere and you can see them absolutely kick it out of the ballpark. So out of the accelerator, they typically raise funds, continue to develop their product, commercialize it, get from beta into paid trials or paid engagements, and then they're on the circuit of conferences and fundraising, generally for at least 6 months to a year. Some raise immediately, some raise a little later, others in piecemeal. So there's a process. I am at a stopping point here, and I know we're at 8:20. I got started about 30 minutes ago, so I might stop here. This is just a snapshot of our 77 portfolio companies, and maybe we can ask Jay. We could try a few questions if you want, or if there are none, then we'll just kick it over to Lauren and take it together.
Thank you, Hubert, for a great talk and introduction about Health Wildcatters and the startup incubation. It's a very interesting talk. There are a few things that I'm very interested to ask questions about, but I do want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. If you have one, you can type in the chat box, or you can come up and unmute and ask your questions right now. Anyone? Maybe I would ask a question, and then in the meantime, people can jump in and ask other questions. So Hubert, you talk about a great thing about community in the very beginning of your presentation. I'm very curious about, in the past 8 years since you founded the Health Wildcatters in 2013, when it was very hard for you to get a check from the investors. Now you have over 100 plus investors and mentor networks here just in Dallas. As if I'm thinking, if I'm an innovator and I want to start a startup tomorrow, maybe my intuition will kind of tell me I need to go to Silicon Valley or somewhere there where the money sits. How would you convince people like this to say, hey, you should stay in Dallas, stay in Texas, because we have great resources and stories here that's just building up? What will be your take on that?
Well. First of all, it's a free country, and if you're dead set on going to Silicon Valley, go. You will find there's a very, very tight-knit club there that invests in each other, which is really understandable. I mean, people always invest in other people, and if you know that this and that person has had a success, or this and this person has some pedigree or something about them, you're more likely to invest in them. So I encourage all of our startups to raise anywhere they can. So there's no ifs or buts, and there are good reasons to move to the Valley in some cases, and if they're successful, that's wonderful. So I have but I think it is, and very often I will hear, oh, there's no money here, there's no money there, and it's always hard. Okay, it is always hard. I mean, yes, are there stories of people raising I mean, I'll tell you, out of our first year, I'm not going to say which startup it was, but there was one startup I had absolutely zero. Once you spend 3 months with someone, you kind of know. You kind of know how things are going to go. I mean, so even within our startups, we're starting to see, okay, well, these guys, there's no way they will stop. And then this person, where was he last week? Like, what the heck is going on here? I mean, we're not, we can't send a truant officer to their home and tell them, show up. They got our money. We kind of hope that they listen. So so we know too who's who and what they've done, and so we gain confidence, and it's all for their good. I mean, if they meet our mentors, our investors, well, they're immediately also impressed with their diligence and them showing up and doing hard work and taking the criticism, which is always constructive. So I don't think that we can convince anyone to do one thing or the other. One thing I can say is that I like to do things by leading by example. So our shop does not exist because somebody gave us $1 million. I mean, I picked up checks from underneath doormats from people, and those are good people, but you got to do what you got to do. There's nothing that startups are doing that I haven't done personally myself. So never get too big for your britches. Never get too full of yourself to think that you're it and everyone else will just throw money at you. And like I said, this example that was a big surprise, this startup that hardly ever showed up. Before I knew it, somebody gave them $500,000, and I was holding my head. It's like, how did this happen? This is impossible. I've got really good, diligent people who didn't get that much money. So it's not always fair, but on average, it's going to be the people that showed up. It's going to be the people that took the advice. And on Silicon Valley versus Dallas, I think I don't. I think the best thing is to go out there and just take a few meetings and see what happens, because it's not that easy at all. And there's a lot of other things I could add, but I'm just stop here.
Got it. Thanks, Hubert. There are a few questions that in the chat box I think it's interesting. One is that, and Lauren would also talk about this later, is have you seen in your portfolio company or some of the pitches you heard that there's some interest in anti-aging industry in healthcare that you've seen recently that's happening there?
So we haven't a specific anti-aging startup in our portfolio. I'm very interested in that. We're actually partners with the International Master Course on Aging Sciences. And so we help them put on their pitch competition every year, well, at least the last couple of years. So I'm very, very interested in anti-aging technologies of all kinds, but that's not been a huge, deluge of applications that we've seen. So we don't have one that is properly in that space at this point.
Got it. Okay. And another question I had here is that, so the person said, the audience said, I have some experience with incubators. The impression is that incubators typically don't focus too much on helping the members to develop, better products. Is there a reason that there's little focus on product development from the incubator side?
Well, I don't know. So we would connect our startups to mentors that have a background in whatever it is they need to develop. So somebody, connect them to several physicians that are in this space, or to product development shops or professionals. So we're very much in favor of the startups forming professional relationships with business consultants and providers that can help them further. And we want those relationships to be not free, but to be, of course, I'm not against a law firm or a prototyping firm to give them a good deal. But I also understand as a business person that I want it to make sense for both sides. It needs to make business sense for both sides. So I hate to see what some incubators do, and probably I should just define this in just a second here. They give 10 hours of free law office time, when this law firm costs $1,000 an hour and the startup cannot afford the 11th hour. So, I mean, they get 10 hours of free time, So in our playbook, we want them to establish relationships with someone that they can consume. So not just get something free and then move to the next. So I regard the first 5 hours, I would say, are getting used up on just getting to know each other. How much sense does it make then after the 10th hour, they can't afford you and they say good luck? It doesn't help either side. The startup wasted a bunch of time, the professionals wasted a bunch of time, and now they can't even engage them as a client. So I like to create situations where they understand that we're happy for them to spend the money we just gave them with whatever business professionals, because they will add to the cadre of people they have on their executive summary, and it'll be a good thing for them to have quality resources on there. On the incubator accelerator, real quick, just to differentiate, incubators generally are economic development driven or not-for-profit organizations. So either a city or university supports them. Accelerators are generally for-profit, but as you can see, also with the social mission, but for-profit entities. Number two, incubators generally are on a rolling basis. So you can join, they have one in whatever, Richardson, and now you join them and then you stay a couple of years. It's cheap office space and there's some of the right people hanging around, which is wonderful. It's sometimes the right support. It's usually small businesses gravitate towards that. They may not even ever have venture capital. Accelerators have a boot camp style 3 and 4 month program. You come in, you were extremely heavily vetted, because an incubator might just take you because you're also, I don't want to say anything about Richardson, it's a great city, but from that same municipality or that same university, it's just like a blood relation. Now you're in. Well, we don't care where you're from. I mean, you can be from any country on this planet. If we think you're one of the 10 best we saw this year, we want you. And number 3 is incubators generally don't invest. This is a big one. Accelerators generally, well, let me just put it this way. You're only an accelerator if you invest, period. That's my opinion, okay? So even if it's a small amount of money, why does it make a big difference? Because if you got an incubator, what does it mean about your business? It has no business meaning. It may be a wonderful thing, but as an investor, you just happen to be in that town and you're smart, you took advantage of a good resource. Good for you. But you may be one of those 500 for all I know. The accelerator, you're in that accelerator and it's one of the best in the country. Well, you're one of 500, you're one of 10 in 500. And those are investors that made an investment decision. So I still might not invest in you, but it's a totally different game. And that's why professional investors and angels pay attention to who comes out of an accelerator, especially one that has a track record, both on helping startups have exits and increasing valuations, and is of a high reputation by whatever measure, but nationally ranked as we are. So that's maybe a good differentiation, because both are good resources, but they have vastly different meaning for follow-on investors.
Thanks, Hubert. Thanks for also clarifying, the difference between incubator and accelerator. Looks like incubator is more from nonprofit. It's in a university setting. It's usually widely available that you can join, versus accelerator like Health Wildcatter is highly selective, and you have a lot of resources to help them grow. I'd also had the impression that you mentioned about this relationship management. I think it's, both were how Health Wildcatter became very successful.
Both solve purposes. Yeah, they're very different, and they're very different, and they both serve their own purposes. And some of our accelerator graduates end up in an incubator or come from an incubator. So we work with them.
Right. Got it. My last question is, how does COVID changed or impacted Health Wildcatters and accelerating, health innovation in your space?
Yeah. So I'm very glad that you said this is a 4-hour talk, so I have another 3.5 to go. But no, I'm going to let Lauren go next. But real quickly, the operational changes that we have implemented that are, we had a full cohort. We had the record number of applicants, number one. So for whatever reason, there were way more applicants last year than before. So I think one thing it did change is if you can't run into people accidentally anymore at conferences, how do you meet investors? I mean, how do you, right? I mean, it's a lot harder. Well, if you go to an accelerator where you immediately get exposed to 100+ investors, maybe a good start. And where all sorts of meetings are teed up for you, maybe a good start. So on the deal flow side, it was phenomenal. On the funding side, the same. We had to close our fund because we were oversubscribed. So on the funding side, people were interested and continue to be interested. This would be in the summer and fall of last year. So this was clearly into the pandemic, and this was clearly a manifestation of the pandemic as well, saying, we're very interested in healthcare innovation and health investments. And then on the operational side for us, we ran the whole program remotely on Zoom. So that's not to be underestimated, because most of these startups, when they join you, they want to be able to meet people in person, and they've always been able to do that. So we had to convince them that we can still deliver the same value or the same relative value to them and than before. And so, it was somewhat of an experiment. None of us chose it, right? We were all forced into it, but it worked beautifully, and it absolutely it was as good as I could have ever wished. On the innovation side, I think it's a long discussion. I think there's all sorts. We have 3 startups that fit a little bit into COVID, one specifically and 2 others peripherally, or 2 specific. Well, anyway, we have 3 that can run with a COVID label if you wanted to. One was specifically invented for that. The other 2 play into COVID-related issues in last year's cohort. So there is innovation that happens. And then on the healthcare scale overall, I just gave a talk on that recently, but basically there are a lot of things that happened during the pandemic that I would say, so I've described it as a war. I think it's as close as we can get to a war, COVID. The country's under assault from this virus, and it forces many people to do things that they would otherwise not do, things that they have never done before, things that they might have resisted for no particular reason, except that they were entrenched in their ways. So example A is, before the pandemic, just slightly over half of all physicians had taken a telemedicine call. By the time June 2020 rolled around, I think the percentage was somewhere in the 90s, but I'll tell you something. I think it's 100% of those that actually are still practicing medicine. So if you didn't take a telemedicine call, you're not practicing medicine. Maybe you're an ER doc, I don't know, but basically everyone. So what it did was it forced an acceleration of a variety of things, and they were in existence. And so in some regards, again, you could say, it's a positive effect of a very unfortunate situation, as is war, as you know, actual war, because innovation gets accelerated and inventions make it to the forefront as well. So I think that's the best example. I don't want to end on that note of war, but certainly I think that for everyone that's in the field, it is a battle. It's been a very, very tough fight, and I think for our generation that grew up without actual wars, that's the closest we've gotten so far.
Thanks, Hubert. I feel like we can talk for another 2 hours if we continue, but I would try to stop here and switch gear to Lauren. Thank you so much, Hubert, for the introduction. And now let's switch gear from the accelerator and getting started from your idea to venture capital, where you can actually get the fund to grow from 1 to 100, right? One astonishing number that I saw last week from Silicon Valley Bank is that the investment from venture funding into healthcare in 2020 compared to 2019 increased by 70%, from 100 billion to 170 billion last year alone. There's some corrections that happening this year, but again, that's a huge investment increase in the healthcare field. So I would love to hear what Lauren say about it and hear some of the experiences that she had. Lauren.
Yeah, and I'll sort of comment on that really quickly while I pull up my slides, but it has certainly been an interesting year. Venture capital is sort of traditionally this have a meeting in the office and do a handshake kind of field, and it really changed in the last year. And we went from having in-office meetings to really doing everything over Zoom. And a lot of venture capital firms traditionally will not invest in a company unless they've met all the founders in person. And so this last year was interesting to see, because many of us made our first investments in companies where we had only met the teams remotely. And so it's been very interesting, an interesting year, and I think a year to remember. So again, I'm Lauren Tyra. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of Green Park and Golf Ventures. We are a local Dallas-based healthcare venture capital firm. And so I'm going to go through really briefly what venture capital is and the cycle of raising money. To sort of circle back on that Silicon Valley question, it depends on who you're looking for. And Green Park and Golf, we're in a really interesting position because we as a firm, in some cases, we're the only venture capital group in a deal. Everybody else are individual angel investors. And then we also are on the extreme opposite end of that, where we are co-investing with some of the largest and oldest firms in Silicon Valley or even throughout the world. And we're likely the smallest investor. And so we run everything in between. And so it's a really interesting position to be in. So this is just an outline of my talk, what we're going to talk about today, what venture capital is, the stage of fundraising, how VC firms are structured, the type of venture capital firms, the cycle of raising money, tips for working with VCs. This is really important because we see a lot of companies fall into the same pitfalls and make the same mistakes. So these are the really good tips to avoid making mistakes when you're raising VC money. And then I'll talk a little bit about Lantern Pharma, which went through Health Wildcatters, then got funded by Green Park and Golf Ventures and has been very successful. So what is venture capital? I think a lot of founders think that venture capital is this monopoly man. You go to this guy with a mustache and he throws money at you for your ideas. And sometimes it does seem like that when you see companies like WeWork getting, millions and millions of dollars somewhat indiscriminately. And other people look at venture capitalists like this, like we're not giving the money out, we're just sitting on the money and people want us to give more money. And it kind of gets back to Hubert's point where Health Wildcatter screens about 500 companies. Our firm, we see probably about 1,000 technologies a year and we invest in maybe 10 new ones. So we're somewhere in between here. We're not throwing money at all 1,000 firms that we see. We're not solely sitting on bags of money. We're definitely funding companies, but it's a large cut. Okay, so what is venture capital? And this is from the National Venture Capital Association. Venture capital is a way to fund your company that cannot be traditionally financed through bank financing. And so typically these are companies that when they start, they may not be generating revenue right away. So they may not be selling a product right away. They may need some funding to help them get going to then start selling a product. And venture capital is the perfect solution to that. We often do work with banks and do debt financing along with our deals, but usually companies that are high risk, high reward, and need money to get going until they can become revenue generating and profitable is a good target for venture capital. Things that are new, things that are innovative, not necessarily like an accounting firm or a restaurant or traditional types of businesses. But we specifically work in healthcare venture capital. So typically people developing drugs and medical devices. And I'll get to more of that in a little bit. Typically you're requiring 5 to 8 years to reach maturity. This is especially true in healthcare venture capital, where we may fund a company that is licensing a drug out of an academic lab, And it may take that company between 5 and 10 years to get through the regulatory process with the FDA before they can sell a single product to a single patient. And so it's something that we expect to have some patience and have a longer cycle. So stages of venture capital, and Hubert touched on this, and this is really important because when you as an entrepreneur, if you have a concept, you have this very early idea and you're working on your concept, and on this axis here, you've got cash flow. So you can see that this is a time where the company needs investment and is particularly when it's on the downward swing here, you're not generating any revenue. This is much longer typically in healthcare companies than it is technology companies or companies that just need to spend 6 months building a product and then they can start selling. In healthcare companies, this may be spend 8 years getting through regulatory and clinical trials, and then they can start selling their drug on the market. So the reason I really like this graph is because it shows you, over time, you're working on your product, you're doing your development, you're rolling your product out, you're growing, and you're expanding. These are very typical milestones for funding, right? You may have people fund your idea, and then once you have a prototype, you may have someone fund your product development, and then someone fund your rollout, and then someone fund growth and expansion. This is where we see people typically acting in that cycle. So the idea and the startup stage, you're looking at seed and angel investors. This is also an area where you're looking at incubator and accelerator involvement, things that are very early, seed and angel, also friends and family. Once companies start rolling out, or, in the case of healthcare, maybe they have their drug licensed out from the university, or they've created a medical device and they have a prototype. A lot of times that's where early stage venture capital will come in. And that's what Green Park and Golf does, my firm. We do early stage to exit. So seed and angel is a little bit early for us, but we sort of play in this early stage development here. And when you think about early stage, it's not just about where your product is in development, but it's also about the venture capital group's check size. Our check size ranges from $250,000 to $2.5 million for a first investment. And so when you're talking about developing a drug, for example, you may need $5 or $6 million to get the drug from the university lab to a point where you can start human clinical trials. We're a good fit for that stage. If you need to fund a large clinical trial, particularly like in the cardiovascular space, which those trials are very large, and you need to go raise $100 million to fund that trial, you're looking at more of a late stage growth VC or public market. And so this cycle is a little bit different depending on what stage of venture capital you're working in, and what area of venture capital you're working in and what you specialize in. So if we look at it a little bit more explicitly, who's actually funding the company at what point? So typically when it's an idea or a startup phase, the founders very often fund the company. Friends and family, this is where you ask around, and friends that are high net worth individuals, accredited investors, may invest a little bit in your company. I often tell people, be very careful when doing this. We very often see friends and family investing in companies that once they get to a traditional venture capital firm, the friends and family have invested at a valuation that is not a market valuation that they're going to get from a traditional venture capital firm. And so in order for the venture capital firm to invest, the friend and family investment gets heavily diluted. It gets very diminished. And so be very careful when investing as friends and family, and try and talk to somebody in VC or someone who's an experienced angel investor if someone approaches you about doing a friends and family investment. Family offices. This is actually something that there are a lot of family offices in Dallas, and we see a lot of family office interest in anti-aging, actually. So family offices are families or individuals who have a net worth roughly of $25 million or greater, and they have an office that manages their investments. A lot of family offices invest in startups, and a lot of family offices invest in healthcare startups. So in town, there's many family offices who may have made money in oil and gas or real estate or other areas, but they do like to invest in healthcare startups. We talked about accelerator and incubator programs, angel investors who are high net worth individuals. And the one thing that we see that's unique to the healthcare field is grants. So there are 11 different government agencies, the US government, that offer grant funding, SBIR and STTR, grant funding anywhere between $250,000 up to several $1 million to develop a healthcare product. These may have citizenship or permanent residency requirements, but typically, if more than 51% of the company is owned by a citizen or permanent resident, you're eligible for this type of grant. And so these are very, very helpful because you go through peer review, and it's like your company and your idea is vetted by a peer review panel of experts. It's one thing that if you are working on a company in the healthcare space, absolutely look into this non-dilutive funding into these grants. I was talking to a company recently that was developing an antiviral therapeutic, and they had never heard of BARDA, which BARDA is the biggest government grant source for anti-infectives, like new antibiotics and new antivirals. So it's worth talking to some people and finding out what grants your company is eligible for, because you get money from the US government and it does not dilute your ownership of your company, and it does not dilute your investors' ownership of your company either. So this size round is anywhere from, I would say, $500,000 to maybe $5 million in the seed stage. $5 million would be a pretty big seed round in a lot of cases, at least for Dallas Fort Worth. For Silicon Valley, $5 million is not as big of a seed round. When you're looking at development stage, you may be looking at a $15 to $20 million round. You're talking about small VCs that have maybe 25 to 100 million in assets under management, larger family offices, not just individual angels, but angel networks. These are groups of angels that invest together and share diligence. And Hubert's correct in that a lot of angel networks are not necessarily experienced in healthcare. They're high net worth individuals, a lot of attorneys, a lot of engineers, a lot of business people, but they can be really valuable business partners. And a lot of angel networks are very active in their portfolio companies. The most active one in Texas is called the Central Texas Angel Network. And the most active one in Dallas Fort Worth is called Cowtown Angels in Fort Worth. Strategic investors is a really interesting group of investors that we see really commonly in healthcare. And strategic investors are large companies that invest in startups, but that they also have their own portfolio. So an example of this would be Boston Scientific or Novartis or Eli Lilly or any of these drug or medical device companies. Agilent has a venture arm. Illumina, that makes sequencers, has a venture arm. I said Boston Scientific. Medtronic also does investments, and Stryker is another medical device company. And so these strategic investors are typically large companies that are already selling products in the space, and they want to place bets in early companies to keep an eye on that company as a potential acquisition target. So strategic investors are very active, particularly in medical device development. So this is the point where I would say, if you're developing a drug or a medical device, you are considering doing all of the regulatory stuff that you need to do before you can start human clinical trials. This seed idea stage is really, I'm going to spin this technology out of a lab or university lab. This development stage is, I'm going to take my drug and get it ready so that the FDA will allow me to do clinical trials. And then in healthcare, this growth and maturity is typically your larger clinical trials or funding commercialization. So you're looking at large VCs, typically I would say more than $250 million in assets under management. Large private equity groups, again, strategic investors, and crossover investors, which are investors that invest in both private and public companies. And typically what they'll do is they'll make an investment in your last private round, and then they'll help support your IPO with an investment. I have this note here to not forget your early investors, because we're sort of in that early investor space. And oftentimes when you take venture capital funding early, it comes with rights that those investors are able to maintain their ownership in the company. And so as the company grows and you raise more money, we can follow on and continue to invest and grow with the company. And we actually really like to do that. In the last 2 years, we've invested more in companies that we had invested in previously than in new companies. So venture capital firms are traditionally structured in this way. So down here in green, if you're the CEO, these are your companies, right? So companies that we are investing in. And the venture capital fund is a limited partnership that will make investments into your companies. It's run by general partners. So that's like me or Hubert or other fund managers, people who manage the fund. And those are the professional staff that you interface with every day. The ownership of the fund is shared between those fund managers and limited partners and investors. These limited partners and investors can be pension funds. They can be wealth funds. They can be individuals that are accredited investors. They can be university endowments. They can be retirement funds. They can be a whole host of things. So there's a lot of different people that make up LPs. Typically with a smaller fund, with a smaller group like Green Park and Golf, a lot of our limited partners are high net worth individuals and family offices. When you start looking at some of the larger venture capital groups, like First Round Ventures, which is one that we have some investments with, they have several university endowments invested in their funds. So they have different structures and they have a different makeup of LPs. One thing that's really helpful is to understand who the limited partners are in a venture capital firm. Sometimes as an entrepreneur, you're blinded to that, but sometimes it can be very helpful. And I'll give an example that we have. One of our limited partners had a very large exit in the skincare space. And so when we make new investments in the skincare space, often we'll ask him to help us vet that company. And then if he can be useful to that company, we make that introduction. This is also really helpful. For example, if you're developing a drug and let's say a venture capital firm has Memorial Sloan Kettering as a limited partner in their fund, they may be able to make some introductions to you, at MSK to meet people who could potentially be interested in helping with your research. So understanding who the LPs are can be very helpful to an entrepreneur, and making sure that you have the right VC fit and the right LP fit to support your company, not just with a check, but with expertise is also very important. Some firms have an alternate structure, and this is becoming much more common. My firm is actually like this, and we see many other firms like this, where either early in a firm's history or early investments made or newer fund managers, oftentimes, rather than having a blind pool of capital that the venture capital fund manager, the general partner, will invest in companies at their sole discretion, we as the venture capital partners and the fund managers will find companies that we like, and then we'll present them to our limited partners, and our limited partners get to pick what companies that they're invested in. A traditional structure, the limited partners invest in the fund manager, and then the fund manager picks the companies at their own discretion. In this alternative model that uses often special purpose vehicles to make those investments, the venture capital firm the fund managers and the partners will make personal investments, pitch the investment to the limited partners, and then the limited partners will make their decisions independently. So this is your large VCs are all this structure. So more than 100 million in management have this more typical structure. Less than 100 million under management, we're seeing a lot of these alternative structures where the limited partners have more choice over the investments that they're making. And my firm in particular, we're split. For companies, for their first investment, we always take it to our limited partners individually, and our limited partners have that choice. For follow-on investments, we do have a traditional fund structure that we can continue to grow with the company to use. So what are the different types of VC firms? When you look at the VC landscape, you have tech, which is a lot of your Silicon Valley. You have social impact funds. These are VC funds that have less of a profit motive and more of a social impact motive. And so you see a lot of these in healthcare that may be investing specifically in certain disease areas or certain areas of healthcare. You have generalists. Generalists are like the Mayfield Fund or First Round that I've mentioned before, that invest broadly across technology, healthcare, all different kinds of startups. You have some VCs that, for example, are women focused, that they want to fund women founders, or they want to invest in products that are specifically targeted towards women, or situations where the woman is likely the consumer in the household. So there's one in Austin called True Wealth Ventures. That's a great women focused fund. We're also seeing a lot of cross-border funds between US and China. There are a lot of venture capital funds that have offices in Hong Kong and in San Francisco, and are investing, both in American companies and in companies in Greater China. So we're seeing a lot of specialty VCs that sort of have a cross-border US-China focus. Healthcare biotech is its own little sector here, and I've split this out into health tech, which is largely software that you can write software to help doctors make a better diagnosis, or you can write software to help a health system deliver better care. Consumer healthcare, this is one that we define very broadly. So we have a sunscreen company, we have an antiperspirant company, we have a oral hygiene company, toothpaste and mouthwashes and things like that. So things that fit within healthcare but are direct to consumer type products. We really like this segment. Not all healthcare VCs consider this a healthcare segment. They consider it outside of their purview. So different VCs really specialize and invest in different things. Healthcare generalists, which is what I would say we are. We invest broadly across healthcare. There are some VC firms that are disease or area focused. Broadview Ventures in Boston is a good example of this. They only invest in drugs and medical devices focused on cardiovascular disease and related comorbidities. So heart disease, diabetes, metabolic diseases. They focus very specifically on cardiovascular and related areas because that's their mandate. Medical device, some firms only invest in medical device and some firms only invest in therapeutics. And you see often healthcare generalists will typically invest in any of these categories, but then you also see firms that will only do 2 categories or 3 categories. And so this is a really sort of important thing to understand before you reach out to a venture capital firm for funding, is understanding, okay, I have a company and my company is developing a medical device. So I need to ensure that I'm not reaching out to, maybe a generalist VC unless they have a good history in medical device, that I'm reaching out to a venture capital firm that actually invests heavily in medical devices, because they're going to be the most help. A generalist may be able to write you a big check, but if they don't have that experience, and if they don't have that network in healthcare VC, they're going to be less helpful to your business as a whole. Okay, the cycle of raising money. This makes it look so easy, and I have to tell you, it's not easy. These little boxes can take over a year, and it is categorized really by who's doing the work or who's really involved in this process. So the company is in teal, the venture capital group is in blue, and then both are in red. And so I've kind of got some mixing here, but you as the company are doing your research and your introductions, and you want to find out what VCs are a good fit for you, both in terms of check size and in terms of area of focus. And then see if you know people on LinkedIn that can introduce you to those folks. So if you're developing a drug company and you're friends with Jay, and you see on LinkedIn that Jay is linked with me, you can go to Jay and say, hey, Jay, can you introduce me to Lauren? I'd like to talk to her about funding my company. Warm introductions, always worth it. The VC will do screening. Like I said, we see about 1,000 technologies a year. Some of those are, we go to a meeting and we see 100 companies in 4 days, and sometimes I may only get a couple new technologies a week. But the VC firm has a screening process where we look and we see, is this company in our sector? Is this company raising an appropriate amount of money? Do we believe that this company is developing a good product, right? If you're developing a medical device in an already very crowded field where there's not high patient need, we're very likely to pass. If you're developing a medical device in an area of high unmet need, we're very likely to take a look at that company. So each VC has their own screening criteria, and will look at the opportunities in front of them and then have a lot of first meetings. So we screen through 1,000 technologies a year, roughly. We maybe have about 100 meetings, first meetings. And that's where we'll get together with the management team, sometimes in person, sometimes over the phone, sometimes over Zoom, and do about an hour for a first pitch. One thing that is important to understand about a first meeting, and one pitfall that I see really commonly, is that people will schedule 20 minutes or half an hour. Schedule a full hour. If a VC is willing to give you an hour, schedule the full hour, because the first 15 minutes is introductions. I'm going to tell you about our firm and who you're talking to, and you're going to tell me, a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to get into your actual pitch. So I'm really big that if a VC will give you an hour, schedule the full hour and use that time wisely. So then a VC is going to do some diligence. We'll look in the company, we'll look in the area. Our team, my team has experts in finance, in marketing, in operations, in medicine. We have a physician, and in science, and I'm the scientist of the team. And so we as a team understand how we're going to do diligence and look at these companies. And this can be a pretty lengthy process. It can take a couple months, and we interview experts. We look for people in our network. If you have a heart disease drug, we're gonna try and find some cardiologists to talk about that, or someone who's worked in heart disease drug development. So the diligence process can be, unfortunately, quite lengthy. Follow up and negotiations. So if a VC says, okay, I'd like to invest, we'll negotiate about the terms and negotiate about the check size and negotiate about the valuation and what you expect from us in terms of support as investors, and what we expect from you in terms of the development of your company. So that's closely related to a lead being identified. A lead investor is someone who sets the terms. So very rarely will only one venture capital firm invest in your company. Commonly, we as a venture capital firm invest alongside either larger or smaller investors. And so if we're the biggest investor, it's likely that we set the terms. If we're a smaller investor, it's likely that a larger VC has set those terms, and we will agree to the terms that a larger VC has set with you in the company. So that's what this term sheet is. It's a sheet that you get from your lead investor. You shop it around to other VCs. You build your syndicate of investors. Sometimes it's only 3 or 4 VCs. Sometimes it may be a VC like us and 20 angels. It just depends on the stage of your company. So you build your syndicate, you get everybody who's going to fund your company all together on the same page, agreeing to the same terms. You're going to do your legal work. You're going to close your round. This is something that, like I said, this can take 6 weeks. This can take over a year. It very much depends on your company. It depends on the VCs. It depends on the market. Right now is a pretty hot market for venture capital. So there's a lot of money in the ecosystem, and there's a lot of people writing fast checks. There was definitely a slowdown when COVID hit last year, and we sort of saw people in the second quarter of last year hesitant to write checks. But then by the third quarter, people were back to writing checks. Okay, tips for working with VC firms. So these are common pitfalls that I see, and I've been working in VC for almost 4 years now. And so I hope that this doesn't seem too basic, but this is stuff that I see every day, that I want you guys to be prepared, and I want y'all to go out and be ready to raise money in the best way possible. So start your conversations early, at least 6 months before your financing is needed. There are times where we may watch a company for 2 years before making an investment. So have many conversations, have them early and have them often. Look for those warm introductions. Like I said, if you're developing a drug, you're developing a medical device, figure out who knows people at healthcare VCs and ask for those warm introductions. Attending specialized conferences like Resi or like Biotech and MedTech Showcase at JP Morgan in January, and there are several throughout the year. That's always helpful. Be open-minded about your raise. We often have entrepreneurs come in and say, well, I only want just one VC to write one check because I don't want to spend all my time raising money. That is just going to set you off on the wrong foot to begin with, because it's so rare that there's only one VC writing a check into your company in any given round of fundraising. So be open-minded about your raise and open-minded about who your investors are going to be, and also open-minded about what the terms are going to be. Oftentimes, if we see a technology that we like, and we vet the science and we vet the medicine and we think it's good, the main reason we may not invest is terms. So be willing to collaborate with your VC. Target the right type and size of VC. We very often get companies that are technology companies looking for funding, and we very rarely fund companies outside of healthcare, maybe 10% of the time these days. So make sure you're targeting the right type of VC. That not only is so that the VC that you're talking to understands what you're talking about and has the right staff to have the expertise to understand about your company, but our relationships with larger VCs for your next round are largely in healthcare. And so if you're a technology company and you need to raise a round that's larger than we can support, we need to introduce you to larger VCs that can potentially fill that role. Our connections are in healthcare, right, with other VCs. And so part of this is not only understanding who has the expertise to help you, but who has the right connections as your company grows to raise more money in the future. Do your diligence on the VCs and talk to other founders. Around Dallas, the VC landscape, I would say, is very good. In healthcare, it's us in Dallas, and then there's a group called BIOS Partners in Fort Worth. And we have different strategies, and we write smaller checks into more companies. BIOS writes bigger checks into fewer companies. So there are different flavors, but definitely do your diligence on the VCs and on the fund managers, because there are times where I've seen companies get a term sheet from a fund manager who maybe doesn't have the best reputation in the field, and then they start working with that fund manager and it becomes really clear it's not a good fit. So do your diligence, ask around, ask other VCs, and whenever you're communicating with a venture capital group, if they're willing to write a check into your company, you should ask them, can I talk to another founder in your portfolio? We are always happy to do that. And sometimes that's how, if we're working with a company that we're really interested in investing in and they have several VCs that are interested, we may proactively say, hey, we have a founder we'd like you to talk to about working with us, because we think that will help you make your decision that we're a good VC and we're a good fit for you. So ask to talk to other founders in the portfolio if it's not offered, because that can really give you an idea of if you're forming the right relationship. Have your pitch deck professionally done. I've got that down here too, but have it completed and have your data room set up before contacting VC firms. This is really important. We get a lot of people who reach out and say, hey, let's just have a phone call. And when we see 1,000 technologies a year, if we have a phone call with everybody, all I would spend all day doing is talking on the phone. And so what a VC wants to see when they are introduced to your company is a nice, clean pitch deck that I can flip through those slides and sort of understand, get a basic understanding of what your company is doing and what stages it is at, so that I can determine, are you a good fit for us? If you're not a good fit for us, I may come back and say, thanks for the deck. You're not a good fit. I would suggest talking to this group, or that group. If you are potentially a good fit, I'll invite you to then do a phone call with us or to do a meeting with us. So have that pitch deck complete before reaching out to VCs. There are exceptions to this. There are a lot of VCs now that are getting into very early technology building. Commonly, that's in collaboration with a university. So we have situations in our own portfolio where we have worked directly with a technology transfer office to help a founder license a technology from a university. We've put in initial funding and then help that company grow. That's called venture creation. And it is something that Third Rock Ventures in Boston does. There are several large firms. Bridge Bio is another one that does venture creation. We do a little bit of venture creation. So there are exceptions to that rule, but if you are an established company looking to raise money for a VC, have your pitch deck ready and have your data room complete before contacting the VC, because if you don't, you're going to have a wasted opportunity there. Ask VCs to share your company with other VCs. Many of us do what we call double opt-in. And so if I think your company is great, but it's not really a good fit for us, I may offer to introduce you to another VC that it would be a good fit for. I'll go to that VC and I'll say, hey, would you take a look at this company? If you're interested in talking to them, I'll make the introduction, and then we'll make that introduction. And so we do this really commonly, and it's not rude at all to ask and to say, hey, would you introduce me to other VCs you think may be interested? If my VC is invested in your company, then we're going to be doing this anyways. We're going to be trying to help you build your syndicate and help you find your next investors, your bigger investors, help you find good investors and fill out the expertise you need around your company. If you have a really good interaction with a VC and they end up passing on your company, they're not going to invest in your company, you should still sort of feel free to ask, like, could you introduce me to some people you think may be a better fit? Because it may be that the VC really likes you. You're just not at the right stage, or you may have a really good interaction with a VC that they have a competitive company in their portfolio and they don't want to invest in two companies that are competing with each other. So they may be willing to introduce you to somebody else. So don't be afraid to ask for those introductions. Oh, this showed up really small. I should have done bigger font. Okay, so Lantern Pharma, and I think this is my last thing, but just to go through, the company was founded in 2013. They went through Health Wildcatters. They're part of the 2014 class of the Health Wildcatters group. And so it's been a while that Hubert has known them specifically. They raised a seed funding round of $1 million shortly after completing Health Wildcatters in 2015, mostly angel investors. 2017, they raised a venture round, including us, Green Park and Golf. We funded their company. They raised $3.7 million. They followed that on in 2019, and we invested in Lantern, and so did BIOS Partners, which is a Fort Worth healthcare venture capital group. Both we and BIOS invested again in 2019. So this is an example of a company that Green Park and Golf has invested in multiple times. We invested again in 2019. In 2020, they did an initial public offering, so they went public. and they went public at about $15 a share, $90 million market cap, and they raised $26 million. For a drug development company, this is a healthy raise. We see many that are bigger, particularly depending on the pipeline in drug therapy. It's a pretty average size IPO for a medical device company, I would say. And then in 2021, this year, they did a secondary public offering for $60 million. So the company was able to raise another $60 million on the public market. And so you can see, this is when I said 8-10 year timeline, you can see from when the company is actually formed back in 2013 to now they're a public company that's well capitalized to run clinical trials and try and get FDA approval for their drugs. It's quite a lengthy timeline. And this is actually a pretty small amount of money for a drug company. A lot of drug companies raise significantly more money than this on the private market. But Lantern is sort of an interesting case because they have drugs that have shown promise in clinical trials previously, but did not necessarily meet their endpoints. And so a clinical trial, for example, that looked at one drug in lung cancer was just all comers lung cancer, but the drug looks like it's actually going to be more effective in one specific population of women who've never smoked, that type of, that population of patients for lung cancer. And so they're taking a drug that previously failed to get approval using artificial intelligence, machine learning to narrow down and identify the right population and then rerunning clinical trials in that right population. This is very common that we're seeing this type of strategy right now. All right, so that is it. This is just my contact information here. If you're raising money, you have a startup or a company, you can link with me on LinkedIn. This is my LinkedIn picture, so y'all can recognize me if you want to link with me on LinkedIn. There's another Laura and Tyra on LinkedIn, so I like my picture on here. And then, like I said, my email, if anybody is looking for venture funding or has ideas or is wanting to start a company, and there's a way that I can help. So I am going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. And I'll take questions. And just to get back, I know I said I would talk about anti-aging, so I'll talk about that real quickly. Anti-aging is a fascinating field. And it's interesting from both a venture capital standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. We're seeing companies that are trying to repurpose drugs like rapamycin and metformin. Rapamycin, of course, is taken for organ transplant patients as immune suppressants, but in low doses, it's been shown to increase longevity in model organisms. We're actually working with a technology that is very low dose rapamycin for the skin for anti-aging. I keep trying to get the investigator to send me some, but it's not, they have to do the FDA trials and stuff. And so I don't get to use it yet. We're also seeing people looking for new chemical entities. So new types of drugs targeting longevity. This is a space that there's a lot of funding for right now. There's a lot more funding than there is promising assets. And so what we're seeing is a lot of Silicon Valley family offices and a lot of other VCs wanting to invest in anti-aging and longevity technologies. And we're not seeing many of those technologies. And so it's a really fascinating market right now in a field where if you have an anti-aging technology, it's very easy in a lot of cases to get funding for right now.
Thanks, Lauren. I also want to give a few minutes to the audience to see if there's any questions from the audience. In the meantime, I want to thank Lauren to give a great introduction, a one-on-one on venture capital, and great tips. How you go from thinking about getting fundraising and then actually get it. There are a lot of steps you have to take, to get there, and there are a lot of, relationship building in the middle, as also Hubert has talked about in the beginning of this presentation. is a relationship building is very important. You need to know who you're getting in touch with. It's not just about the checks. Sometimes you might want to compromise a little bit of the numbers on the check to get the better network so that they can help you to grow. So it was a great talk from both Hubert and Lauren. Thank you so much. But is there any questions from the audiences? Otherwise, I would ask.
And I will fully admit. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. This is Bohong speaking. I'm working in biomedical device. So I'm very interested in if you have some examples to show us how a small company, medical device company, grow up and get a fund and eventually grow bigger, something like that. And my second question is, as VC, your primary goal probably get the fund grow. So I mean, what is the preferred exit strategy or way your company have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first question, if you look at GPG Ventures, if you Google Green Parking Golf Ventures, there's a company called Channel Med Systems. Channel Med Systems is a really interesting one because it's a company that we first invested in back in 2014, and they were developing a medical device for cryoablation, uterine endometrial cryoablation for women with heavy menstrual bleeding. And so they were part of a medical device incubator in San Francisco that we have a very close relationship with. And we funded them, and they have larger VCs, and they went all the way through their clinical trials. They got FDA approval in 2019. And they actually had a large acquisition offer from Boston Scientific before Boston Scientific decided to get out of women's health. So that is a very, very interesting case, but they're commercializing right now. They're raising money to commercialize at the moment. And we're seeing a lot of medical device companies. There's two. Let me back up and say there's sort of, in my mind, two classes of regulatory for medical device. There are pre-market approval, which is the very stringent pathway that you have something very novel and it needs the highest level of clinical trial proof for the FDA to allow you to sell that product. The second is 510K. And that can either be with a predicate or de novo. And so that means that there is a similar medical device already on the market and you can do less work to get your product on the market, but it's a less unique product often. And so when we look at exits, these companies that are pre-market approval or medical devices that are more unique are more likely to go public when they get FDA approval, or are more likely to get bought on FDA approval. 510K devices. So if it's a new catheter or a new stent or something that there's already a product like that on the market and you have a better version, you have an updated version, typically a large medical device manufacturer is going to want to see several years of sales and see you prove out that market and prove out that not only is your device better, but you're actually going to set that track record and get physicians to buy your device. And so that's sort of what we see. Channel Med Systems in our portfolio is probably the most interesting. We have another one that's Microtransponder. This is a company out of the University of Texas at Dallas that is vagal nerve stimulation for stroke rehabilitation. So people who have a stroke and they have upper extremity weakness, after about the first 6 months post-stroke, whatever recovery, whatever limb function you have is likely what you're going to have for the rest of your life currently. So Microtransponder found that by pairing vagal nerve stimulation with certain rehabilitative exercises, you can enhance plasticity in the brain and actually regain function. It's very novel. And we've funded that company for almost a decade. And they had a positive clinical trial last year. They are filing for FDA approval. They got breakthrough designation and they're looking at their options, right? So should they go public? Should they Should they commercialize, raise around privately? Should they, look for an acquisition? And so that's a really common point where medical device companies will, once they get approval, will start looking to see whether they're going to go public or they're going to get purchased. Repeat your second question for me. I'm sorry, I lost your second question.
No problem. Thank you. So from your company, so you're the VC fund. What is your exit strategy?
Yeah, no, it depends. It depends on where in the cycle somebody invests. Early venture capital groups are likely going to want to see some path to a 10x multiple on their capital invested. So someone who's investing very early and taking a significant amount of risk wants to see, okay, if I'm going to invest 10 million on a $15 million pre-money valuation, so after the funding, your company is going to be worth $25 million is what we set the price at. Do I see the potential for someone to buy your company for at least $250 million, right? Is there the potential for a 10x multiple exit? Early VCs typically like to see that or better. Later VCs typically will look for like a 3 to 5x multiple. They may be investing more money, but they're expecting a shorter time frame, and they're looking for a faster flip in a lower multiple because they don't expect to be in the investment as long, and they're putting more capital to work up front. And so a lot of times they're more likely to invest on something that's a 3 to 5x. So it depends too. Drugs typically get bought for much more by large drug companies than medical devices do. And so when we look at opportunities, we definitely base what we're looking at based on what field we're looking at, because we may expect a larger multiple on a drug, which obviously in most cases is more risky than we would on a health IT play, right? So something that is a computer software that's maybe less risky, we may accept a lower or be looking for a lower exit multiple. So it depends on the stage of VC, and it depends on the area that you're investing in. Most VCs will tell you. I mean, if people ask us what we're looking for, if a company asks us sort of what our expectations are, we'll typically have a conversation about it, because this again is part of that relationship. We want to know what your expectations are, and you should understand what our expectations are, but it differs from VC to VC.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. I know we are at time, we're a little over time, but really thank Lauren and Hubert for sharing your knowledge for over 2 hours now. I've learned a lot personally. I will hand it to Maggie for the closing remarks here. Thank you so much, Maggie.
And y'all are welcome to email me with more questions too. If you have a company or you have questions, I'm happy to have Jay be the person who introduced me to everyone, and I'll help you where I can.
I probably will need 2 more hours to get more discussion. Okay, thank you, Hubert and Lauren, to make such a wonderful presentation. And thank you, Jay, being a perfect host and do all the hard works in the past 2 weeks to prepare this event. And today, from Hubert and Lauren's presidential, and we know is kind of give us a big picture from the company startup, from the idea, investment, until to the IPO. That's exactly what they did from this talk. And Hubert introduced us to know how incubator and accelerator works, just as the scene at the Wildcatter said. they show the entrepreneurs how to be visible, accessible, credible, and then if you're lucky, turn to be investable. I think that's a really, really clear, makes sense what you do for the startup. I really suggest everybody, if you have a time, will go to Wildcatter's website. See, there are so many kinds of events. It really helps. If you want to get more details, I suggest to join the event, even join the LinkedIn group to build up your own networks. I think that's a good beginning. And for Lauren, give us a big picture about how VC works. Is after you're ready to be investable, and then how can you find investors? Not just like Jay said, not only for the fund, but also you're looking for the mentor. You're looking for the people know this area, how to build up the network in this industry. So Laura tells us not only how the venture capital works, but the structure of the venture capitals and the different types of the venture capitals. You, as entrepreneurs, sometimes you have to find the right one can pay their interest to you. That's I learned from today, part of I learned from today's speech. I hope everybody will learn more today. And before I close on the event, I want to share one more information. On March 3rd, GC, a nonprofit group in our community will invite a famous investor, Andrew, in fact, Andrew investor too, and his name is Xu Xiaoping. He was a co-founder of New Oriental Education, and he will introduce his experience and how his incubator and accelerator work, and welcome everybody to pay attention to the advertisement and join us, and you will see the difference and the similarity between Chinese incubator and venture capital works with the US side. That's thank you everyone. And thank you all the audience, and thank you our working team. Thank you, Jay, Lauren, and Hobart. And we hope we can build up the networks and work together to serve this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.